Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. That's my Mr. Bobinski accent from Coraline, because Coraline's going to be featured in this video today. I'm wearing my Pottsfield Harvest Festival sweater to go along with the theme of today's video, which is cozy, spooky children's horror. I was going to do a spooky TBR thing for today's video, just talking again about horror books that I'm sure I've talked about 500 times already. And I just wasn't feeling it, but I did realize that one of the other spooky horror-esque things that I happen to love and collect is children's horror. This shirt is from a show called Over the Garden Wall, which is a perfect example of the type of children's horror that I'm talking about. If you've never seen it, it's a Cartoon Network show about two brothers lost in the woods, and it's just them trying to find their way home, and each episode they run into just the most bizarre things that are actually terrifying. My second favorite episode is the Pottsfield episode. My first favorite episode is Auntie Whispers. The thing to me that makes children's horror so wonderful and fun to read is because it's always based more in fear of unknown and sense of wonder and curiosity and discovery rather than just sheer typical horror tropes. Like, they have to lean on things other than gore and genuinely like terrifying, upsetting things. You can't have blood and guts and murder in a kid's book unless you craft it in a way that's very whimsical, where children can still sleep at night eventually one day and are not scarred for life and turned into little serial killers. Kids' horror isn't meant to necessarily scare the reader, it's just meant to evoke a feeling of not knowing what is out there. For example, in the show Over the Garden Wall, there's nothing overtly graphic or frightening. Some of the imagery is a little spooky and it does deal with ghosts and some more typical monsters, but it's the sense that something is off. I feel like kids' horror focuses a lot on the uncanny valley sensation, where things are just so bizarre that a child might not even know it's spooky, but to an adult, you're like, something's wrong. So what I'm going to showcase today is a list of my favorite cozy middle grade horror books. I have different categories as always. I've got graphic novels, I've got storybooks, which is picture books, and I've got chapter books, and I have 2 anthologies, I believe. Some of these you will have certainly heard of before. I've already mentioned Coraline, and then some of them you probably never have. And I'm also going to be giving my opinion on the age range that these are for. Take those with a grain of salt. I do work at a bookstore where I have to recommend books based on age, but I'm not like the expert. And if you're going to be buying these books for your kids, you know your kids better than I do. Let's just get started, okay? I have selected 5 graphic novels, and we're starting with 2 of my absolute favorites, Garlic and the Vampire and Garlic and the Witch. How cute are these? These are both written and illustrated by Brie Paulson. Other than the obvious of focusing on Garlic and the Vampire, this is a story about overcoming anxiety and self-worth and friendship and things like that. The witch Agnes, who is lovely, she's not a scary witch, has brought her garden vegetables to life just to help her out with gardening, and over time they have become people of their own sorts. The vegetables sell other vegetables at the market. The other vegetables are not alive. Don't worry. It is a kind of weird like cannibalistic thing, but like not. But one day when the veggies are working in the garden, they notice that the spooky abandoned castle in the forest has smoke coming out of it, and they realize there's a vampire living inside. And who's better to ward off a vampire than Garlic? This series is adorable and very sweet and full of lovely messaging, and it's good for really any age. They're not scary. I would say ages 5 and up. Another just cute spooky season graphic novel read is Hooky. Again, this one is more for the vibes and not actual scariness. It's about 2 12-year-old witches who miss the bus to magic school and accidentally reveal themselves as witches to the community and are branded traitors to which kind. It's very Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The reason I like this one though is it gives me the same vibe as Kiki's Delivery Service, which is one of my favorite fall-time movies. Quite fun, some unique magic, and the 3rd volume just came out last month. And I would say Hooky is fine for ages 8 and up. more for the reading level than anything else. Next we have Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill. Again, this is more for the vibes than any actual Halloween-y spookiness. It's not even necessarily an autumn themed graphic novel, it just takes place mainly at night and has a lot to do with the moon and moths and magic, and to me that's just, you know, pretty good for spooky season, especially for kids. Like look at that. That's an autumn moth if I've ever seen one. Anya is a moth keeper meant to protect the moon moths, which are friends of the moon spirit essentially. But one night she glimpses something that could destroy everything her and her family know and keep sacred. It's an absolutely stunning graphic novel. The art is phenomenal, and there's actually a lot less dialogue and writing in this novel. It's more to do with the art and pictures and panels. And again, I'd say ages 9+. The last graphic novel I want to talk about is actually a manga, and it's The Girl from the Other Side, Shularoon. Now this is, for whatever reason, shelved as 16+, but I have read it and I don't agree with that age rating. So just for the sake of not leading you down the wrong path, we'll say 12+. I've got the deluxe edition here, which is a bind up of the first 3 volumes, but you can get them individually bound as well. It's essentially Monsters Inc., but much more whimsical and Studio Ghibli feeling. It's the story of a little girl who has crossed over into the land of demons, and they have tea parties and are friends. It does deal with some more mature themes of loss and fear, and has some frightening imagery, but nothing graphic. So if you are an adult and you're just here to learn about these vibes because you agree with me that whimsical kids horror is the best, definitely pick this up. If this is for a child, use your own judgment. I don't know your kids. Those are the graphic novels. There are a lot more I could list. I truly wanted to put like 75 books in this video today, but those are the ones that I own and have read. You can find a ton of like 9 to 12 age range books about witches, vampires, ghost hunting, zombies, things like that. But those are the ones that I feel fit the theme the best. Let's talk about storybooks. And by storybooks, I mean picture books. A lot of my storybooks from childhood did not fit in this genre because I think it was less common to buy your children scary things when I was a child. Especially my parents would never have intentionally bought me things that would frighten me. I was a scared child. I was afraid of everything. So these books were not for me as a kid, but they are for me as an adult. The first one I have to show off is Mary Who Wrote Frankenstein. This is for ages 5 and up and is a picture book interpretation of the story of Mary Shelley. So this is not the tale of Frankenstein, but for kids, this is a condensed version of Mary Shelley's real life, her growing up as a little girl full of imagination and leading into the now historic night that she spent with Lord Byron and all those friends doing a ghost story writing competition where she ultimately dreamed up the idea of Frankenstein. I absolutely adore the illustrations that we have in this book. It's one of my favorite styles. The illustrations, of course, are by Julia Sarda. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Speaking of being an imaginative child, the next book I have to count it as a picture book. You'll see why. It's The Mysteries of Harris Burdick. This copy is so beat up. I don't know if you can tell, but this is my actual book from childhood. It's not something I picked up recently, and I have shown it a lot of love. The premise of this is that the real author, Chris Van Allsburg, found a collection of illustrations by Harris Burdick, who disappeared, I think, and they all come with just one simple line of text. So it's essentially a book of writing prompts, but for little kids. But the illustrations are so stunning. So it definitely got my mind working as a kid. There are some in here that like really genuinely kind of scared me because of how they got my mind going, and some that just fueled my fantasy imagination. I'll show you some of my favorite ones. Yeah, one of the ones that stuck with me the most as a child is called Mr. Linden's Library. So that's the illustration. And the line of text is, he had warned her about the book. Now it was too late. There are other ones like this one that just scared me because I don't like it. It's called The 7 Chairs. The 5th one ended up in France. This one I just feel is very Halloween-y because it's got a pumpkin in it. It's called Just Dessert. Actually, it's called Just Desert. Is that a typo, or is it supposed to be Just Desert? She lowered the knife and it grew even brighter. Anyways, yeah, this is one of my favorite things. in the world. The final picture book I want to show you just came out this last year, actually. It's The Skull by John Clausen. I spoke about it in my last video, actually. It is a Tyrolean folktale, which I looked up since then, and that means an Austrian folktale. It's the story of a little girl named Ottila who runs away from home, and as she's getting cold and starts to lie down in the snow, she sees a castle in the woods inhabited by a skull. The skull invites her to stay, but only if he helps defend him from a headless skeleton that comes at night. John Clausen's illustrations are classic, and it's a genuinely kind of spooky tale, I won't lie. It is still for ages like 5 up, but if your child has a fear of skeletons and bones, I'd avoid it. Now, generally, chapter books are going to all be for like ages 9 plus. Based on my own experiences, I would say some are more like 12 plus or 10 plus. I don't know. I don't know kids. I don't remember what they get scared of. But I have a number here to talk about. Let's just get it out of the way because I've already talked about it like 3 times, but it's Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I think I've mentioned this before on Instagram, but Coraline is one of those movies where, although there are vast differences between the movie and the book, I love them both for what they are, and I think they're both incredible. Coraline is something I watch every autumn. I do reread it every autumn if I'm up for it. Sometimes I'm just not, because like I've got a huge TBR. If you don't know the story of Coraline, where have you been? Just kidding. If you don't know the story of Coraline, it is the story of a young girl who has parents that don't really pay attention to her. They're so busy with work, and through circumstances, she ends up finding a door in her home that leads to the other world. In the other world, there are the other mother and other father and just alternate versions of people that she knows. And at first it seems like a paradise, and it's not until the other mother says she can stay as long as she allows Coraline to sew buttons onto her eyes that Coraline realizes, maybe this is a bad thing. This is one of those ones where, because it is an older book, it is genuinely more frightening than some newer like kids horror. Another thing I love about kids chapter books specifically is that they often, almost always, come with little illustrations inside that can be truly horrific. A more recent release that I would love to talk about today is The Clackety. This is by Laura Sempf, and it is the story of a girl called Evie who lives in the 7th most haunted town in America. I think it's America. Yes. In a town called Blight Harbor. Ghosts are just a normal thing in this town, and her aunt Desdemona is not a ghostbuster, but she gives advice on how to deal with the ghosts that are living in your house. And like everyone has a problem with that. One day, Desdemona goes missing, and it is up to Evie to locate her with the help of a monstrous creature called the Clackety. I don't know why I'm talking like this. Monstrous creature. Oh, and the ghost of a serial killer. Forgot about that part. The Clackety is really fun. It's for a slightly older audience, I would say like 10 plus. But yeah, it's like Frankenweenie, Monster House, Series of Unfortunate Events. All right, I didn't plan on doing Series of Unfortunate Events next, but I brought it up, so I will. I own the whole series, but I'm just gonna bring out the first 3 books instead of trying to hold 12, 13? You probably know A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. It's been made into a movie a long time ago with Emily Browning in it. And I don't know why I said Emily Browning like she was the celebrity in it. It had Jim Carrey in it. And then more recently into a TV show with Neil Patrick Harris. It is the story of the Baudelaire children who are orphaned in a horrible fire accident. Or was it an accident? And they must go live with a series of relatives or people that knew their parents. And the whole time their fortune is being hunted by Count Olaf, who routinely tries to murder the kids. And does routinely murder their guardian. Again, it's the older books, right? Because this is still for ages like 9 or 10. There's a lot of murder. And usually it's in like a comedic, whimsical way. Like, oh my god, he was eaten by a snake. She fell into a paper mill. But you can't really get away from the fact that that's actually awful. That being said, these books are fantastic. The next book is totally underrated. You've probably never heard of it, but I reread it every year, if not more often. My copy is missing the dust jacket, so you won't be able to actually see what it's called, but it's The Secret Order of the Gum Street Girls by Elise Primavera. This is a Wizard of Oz inspired story in the town of Sherbet, There's a map here. Everything is really nice all of the time. And on Gum Street, there live 3 little girls, Kat, Franny, and Prudence, and they all hate each other. They're enemies. But then a girl named Ivy moves in with her mom, and Ivy is jinxed. She has a jinx that follows her around. The girls are brought together, and they have to essentially defeat a wicked witch in a very Wizard of Oz fashion. There are a lot of nods to the Wizard of Oz, like the ruby slippers. These dogs here are Toto, but twice. And it's got creepy illustration. Now, did you know that V.E. Schwab, your favorite, Victoria E. Schwab, wrote a children's horror series? I think the series is called the Cassidy Blake series, but the first book is City of Ghosts. I have the third one, Bridge of Souls. This series is about a girl named Cass, whose parents are not great ghost hunters, but Cass herself can actually see ghosts and is friends with them and interacts with them, and she has to follow her parents around Scotland looking for ghosts. What kicks off the story is that Cass and her family travel to Edinburgh, where she meets another girl who can also see ghosts and learns that her role in this world is to essentially ferry ghosts through the veil. There is a trigger warning on this one for drowning. She has a near drowning experience that's a little bit vivid for children. I think this is probably the youngest thing that she's written. Gallant is another like ghost story, but that's for teens, so I didn't include it in this video. City of Ghosts though, and Tunnel of Bones and Bridge of Souls are for kiddos. I won't focus on the next one too much because you know it and I don't need to talk about it, but we're in the anthologies now, and one of the anthologies that I own is a Roald Dahl anthology. Roald Dahl is the OG horror for children, and he does not hold back. Roald Dahl's stories often involve parents and evil adults getting what's coming to them, and also bratty kids getting what's coming to them, so that's the part where it's like, what? If you have a favorite Roald Dahl story, let me know down in the comments below. Because I've only really read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the BFG, James and the Giant Peach. Is that all the ones I've read, even though I have this treasury? And now I'm on the last book. And it is another anthology, and it is called Beasts and Beauty. It's from the author of School for Good and Evil. This is an anthology of Grimm's fairy tales and like Disney fairy tales. This anthology features beautiful illustrations as well throughout the entire book. See if we can get some more, yeah. But these stories are certainly pulled more from the source material of Grimm's fairy tales rather than from like the Disney interpretations. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, Grimm's fairy tales are much, much, much darker than the replications would suggest. For example, my favorite story in this anthology is actually the first one, which is the Little Red Riding Hood retelling. And it starts off like this. On the first day of spring, the wolves eat the prettiest girl. Much more in line with traditional fables than Disney-fied fairy tales. 9+? 10+? I don't know. I don't know why I agreed to do this age range thing because I don't know what I'm talking about. That was all of the official entries into this video. I do have one more to talk about though, because I found it upstairs while I was collecting books for this. I don't want to officially recommend it because it's been so long since I read it. I don't remember if it's actually good. I remember it felt good in my heart. It's Carbonell. It's a witchy book about the Prince of Cats. I don't know, guys. Thank you guys for sticking around. Those are my recommendations for cozy kids horror. There are so many more books I could have included in this video, but I've already been talking for so long. Kids horror is one of my favorite genres of all time. If you have any suggestions, put them in the comments below. I would love to see them, and I think other people would love to see them as well. Don't forget that one day we'll all join the Pottsfield Harvest Festival. But before I go, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell icon so you know when I upload new videos. I upload 2 days a week. I love you guys. Goodbye.